Coming up next on the Jeff Crilley Show, you'll meet an ex-CIA analyst who's going to teach us all to think like somebody in the CIA. His journey just ahead.
Many are predicting that the worst is yet to come, which is unfortunate, said one person here. Until now, they've enjoyed the reputation of being the nation's icebox.
Watched a burglar in his home this morning by webcam.
As a journalist of over 25 years, stories are what make my world turn.
Reporting live from the Dallas newsroom tonight, Jeff Crilley, Fox 4 News.
But in 2008, I took the jump from my familiar life and started a PR firm from my home.
We're talking about anyone with a camcorder like the one I'm using becomes a television network.
We started slowly growing the company, and we now have over 100 clients, and we've branched into the world of live digital broadcasting. I now own 8 different TV studios and have a huge team, and the stories that I now get to share are sometimes the most important of my life. Life has a funny way of coming around full circle. This is the Jeff Crilley Show.
Well, if a doctor, a lawyer go into a bar and then there's a third person, and that third person happens to be an ex-CIA analyst, who's got the coolest story? I want to be my next guest. David McCloskey is in the studio, author, speaker, ex-CIA analyst. When you say that to people, do they say, what's their first reaction?
Most people think I'm lying.
Really?
Yeah.
Like
yeah, especially in Dallas, like, okay, you're messing with me.
Yes.
In DC, everyone, it's pretty normal. Here, it's a little bit more out of the ordinary. So most people think you're messing with them. So it takes a few iterations before they believe it. Well, typically.
We're going to talk about your fabulous speaking career in a minute, but I want to talk about like your journey with the CIA. How young were you? When did you get hired?
So I was 19 when I took my first polygraph, and I had never intended that I would actually join the CIA. I mean, I basically went to school, and my mom said, you're majoring in international relations, you're never going to get a job. But the CIA actually came on campus and recruited when I was a sophomore. And like many young people, my resume was not that impressive. The most recent thing on it was I had been a cashier at Wendy's. And I thought, okay, well, the CIA would be a bit of a step up from that. They probably won't take me, but I jumped in, gave the application, and took the polygraph when I was 19 and got in. So wow. I took the plunge.
And I was reading in your bio that you had some important tasks, including writing the president's daily briefing. What was that about?
Well, so that is basically the most classified newspaper that there is. There's 10 to 15 articles that go into the president's daily brief every day. And it's really a compilation of the most important stuff that's coming out of the CIA, out of the intelligence community, that meets the threshold for the president to read it. And so I was writing articles for that when I was at the CIA. I spent most of my time working on the Middle East, so most of the articles I wrote were about Syria or terrorism or Iraq or Lebanon, topics like that.
Well, I'm not asking you to give away confidential stuff, but a typical item in the brief would be country X, we've learned, might be doing this or that. I mean, is that the kind of thing that's in the brief?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give you a practical example of one, I think, without divulging too many secrets. So I worked on Syria. In 2010, 2011, Syria, like many Arab countries at the time, saw a protest movement start. And one of the major questions that the president had at that time was, well, what's going to happen? Is this going to destabilize President Assad's regime? And so one of the articles we wrote was different scenarios for what happens to Syria, what happens to the Assad regime. So that obviously, what happens to the Syrian government matters immensely to us. And so a PDB, an article for the president's daily brief, was commissioned to answer that question.
Did you feel a lot of pressure? I mean, you're a young man writing very confidential stuff for the commander-in-chief of the strongest nation on the planet.
Yeah, it is intimidating. It absolutely is. I mean, there is a sense where you get habituated to it over time, and so it becomes part of the daily grind. I can remember days thinking, well, I wish I didn't have to write this for the president because I want to go home early and have dinner with my wife. But you do get used to it. But I would say it doesn't really ever lose its sheen. I mean, you are writing something that the president and other people around them are reading and hopefully are using to make decisions. And that's really cool.
Yeah, it really is. You've got great war stories, I'm sure. We're going to pull up your website because you left the CIA and you started a fabulous speaking career. I want to talk about the kinds of audiences you like to speak to.
Well, so the answer is not just one. I speak on geopolitics, sort of how do you think about the world like a CIA officer. I speak on inside the CIA, what is it actually like to work in the espionage business, sort of cutting through the world of Jack Ryan and, Tom Clancy and Mission Impossible to say, like, what is it actually like? And then I also do a talk on storytelling. How do you apply the principles? I'm now a novelist. I write spy novels. How do you tell stories, and how do you use storytelling techniques to, better communicate? And that could be in the boardroom. That could be with analysts putting together presentations. And so the types of audiences that I like to speak to really run the gamut from, it could be corporate audiences where you have senior leaders of a company who need to make decisions about their business in the world and want to understand what's going on in the world. It could be large groups that are just trying to have a fun night out and want to understand a little bit more about, well, what is the intelligence community? What is CIA actually like? Or it could be groups where you have a team that needs to be able to come together more effectively to tell a story about the company, a new product, and want to leverage some techniques from the world of storytelling to make that really punch, make it land.
Sure. I noticed one of your speeches, and I'm paraphrasing, is think like a CIA agent. I think all companies can learn from doing more homework, more research before they go into any endeavor. You want to talk a little bit about the prep that it takes to be successful in the CIA and how that would apply to corporate America?
Yeah. So you really, especially as an analyst, you really have to learn how to think critically and to evaluate information that could be contradictory, it could be fragmentary, to write succinctly and clearly, so communicate clearly, and to be able to, edit writing in order to really hone the message effectively so that you were saying exactly and precisely what you want to say. And so I think those types of techniques, from the critical thinking to the writing and the communication, are really critical no matter what kind of business you're in, because you need people who are, if you're sorting through how to launch a product, you're sorting through how to enter a new market, crisp, clear, analytic thinking and communication is exactly what you need. So I think that training sort of directly translates into many different walks of life and jobs.
Okay, before we talk about your best-selling novels, I want to talk about the difference between writing a brief and then writing a novel. It's a different style, isn't it?
So there are similarities.
Okay.
But it is a very different muscle, I would say. When you're writing, let's say for the President's Daily Brief, you were stripping out emotion and voice and character, and you were just saying, what, why, so what, in about a page. In the world of a novel, you are trying to bring someone into an emotional experience where they're drawn to your voice, the voice of your characters, they're interested in the plot. All of that really is a very different muscle. And the best way I can describe it is when you're writing an analytical piece, you're writing for the President's Daily Brief, you are you're using a lot of ego, your own ego strength, to then put down on paper the raw facts about something so someone else could understand. When you're writing a novel, you are trying to almost be a conduit for a story that I think, frankly, might already exist somewhere. You're just bringing it into being here. And so it is a very different muscle to bring those two different types of writing, I think, into the world.
Sure. We'll talk about your latest novel first. It's called Moscow X. So we're going to put it up on the screen, and I want you to talk about what that novel is all about.
Yeah. So Moscow X is a spy novel. It is a story about really what might it look like if the CIA got very serious about sticking it to Vladimir Putin. And it is a story, it follows this group inside the CIA called Moscow X. It's a fictional unit of the Central Intelligence Agency. But in the book, Moscow X is charged with taking this very outside-the-box, aggressive approach to dealing with the Russians. It's led by a very colorful, very deranged CIA officer named Artemis Proctor, who decides that her plan as part of Moscow X will be to convince Vladimir Putin that a coup is underway when one is in fact not. So she recruits 2 CIA case officers. We call them NOCs, NOCs, officers under non-official cover, to get close to one of Putin's money men. And that money man, this very despicable guy named Vadim, is married to a woman named Anna, who's a banker, but who also, unbeknownst to CIA, is an intelligence officer, a Russian intelligence officer, and she's playing a game all her own. So it is a story of modern espionage, certainly, but it's also, I hope, a story about betrayal, love, loyalty, and frankly, vengeance, kind of set amid this very real shadow war between Washington and Moscow.
All right, when they turn that into a movie, who do you see playing? Who plays the protagonist?
All right, well, so this case officer, Artemis Proctor, who I think is one of my favorite characters, she's tremendous fun to write. I think I would hope that she would be played either by Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who played Elaine Bennis on Seinfeld, and then the vice president in Veep, or Aubrey Plaza, who I think does a wonderful job of playing these kind of deranged characters in her television shows and movies. So either of those two, I would hope, would play Proctor.
I love it. Okay, let's go to your first novel was called Damascus Station. Let's put that on the screen and let's talk about that one.
Yeah, so Damascus Station, so I worked on Syria for pretty much the entirety of my time at CIA. So this is my first book and probably so far my most personal. The story is about a CIA case officer named Sam and his Syrian recruit Miriam, who break one of the cardinal rules of espionage and fall into a very forbidden romantic relationship. They go into Damascus to hunt down the killer of another CIA case officer, and in so doing really come face to face with all the tension and the conflict and the passion in their own relationship, as well as into direct conflict with a fairly brutal pair of Syrian brothers who are guarding a very dark secret at the heart of the regime. So this story really, if I were to strip it all down, of course, it's a spy novel, but it's also a love story. And it's a story about what it looks like to be human in the middle of a really inhuman conflict, because it's set in the middle of the Syrian civil war.
I'm curious about your process, because I wrote a nonfiction book that was very successful, but I've never written a fiction book. Do you really get into the characters? Do the characters speak to you as you're writing?
You hope so. I mean, I don't outline. I generally start a project with an idea about an emotionally impactful scene that's going to happen later in the novel that I think maybe harnesses some of the potential energy of the book. And then I just try to write toward that scene. And as I do that, I discover, and I think in the language here, you could have a lot of conversation with authors about, well, do you create the characters or do you sort of discover them? It feels to me like I'm discovering these characters, and then I'm just, as I write, I'm listening to the story that they're telling me. And the more energy a character has, the clearer and louder you hear that voice.
And did you have moments in writing both novels where you're starting down a path and the character is actually speaking to you, saying, "No, I would not do it that way," or "That's not me"? I mean, do the characters start to guide the author after a while?
I think the characters absolutely guide the author, but it's not. I wish it were that clear, as you just described it. At least it's not for me. The way I experience it is I write something and I realize, it might be when I'm editing, and sometimes it could be as I'm writing it, I'll actually realize it doesn't work. I write it down, it's like, they wouldn't say that here. And then I'll go back and delete it, and then start anew. But it is a version of speaking to the author, I think.
Awesome. We've only got a couple minutes left, so I want to go back to your speaking career and give you a chance to talk to the CEO of a company that might want to bring you in to speak. Talk to that person on why your talk is so refreshingly different.
Well, I do bring, across really all of the talks, I bring that experience as a CIA analyst and officer, as someone who has looked at geopolitics and the way the world actually works, and bring that to the conversation, to the talk, to your team, to help you unpack what the CIA is, all the way to what does the Russia-Ukraine conflict mean for your business? What does artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, what does this sort of new frontier of technology mean for you? All of that are topics that I worked on at CIA and that I really hope to bring to folks who invite me in to speak.
Outstanding. You've been an amazing guest. We're going to end with his website, which is davidmccloskeybooks.com, the great David McCloskey. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Jeff. Great to be here.
You bet. That's it for now. We'll see you next time.